they're more than likely thought leaders. So we need to think about what we're going to do to reposition your customer-facing team to show up in a way that's actually welcomed by your most important buyer personas. So this is a massive repositioning need, but it's incredibly important if you want to stay relevant to the way that people now research and make their purchase decisions. In a typical buyer's journey, most analysts have found about 28 touch points happen between complete stranger and purchase decision. The problem is, by default, most companies in and around the data center industry. Hello, data center friends from around the globe. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest questions that you have around your sales and marketing challenges, regardless of what kind of company or role that you're in within the data center industry. Maybe you're from a data center operator like colocation, wholesale, hyperscale, or do something related to edge or modular. Or perhaps you're from a technology or a facilities company that sells to or partners with data center related companies. Or maybe you're on the real estate or investment or construction side, or perhaps your company does something related to outsourced sales and marketing. Regardless of work you do on the go-to-market team, maybe you're in sales or marketing or customer success or account management or product or channel partnerships, or perhaps you get to align everyone all together in an executive sponsor role. Either way, if you're looking to improve what you do in and around the data center industry, you are for sure in the right place. So to make sure that you're able to learn about live streams, webinars, and other resources like this, make sure that you're subscribed to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter so you can get notified each Sunday right to your inbox. To subscribe to the newsletter, visit www.dcsmi.com. So with that, what is on the agenda for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show? First up, we're going to look at cybersecurity solutions, and in particular, how a cybersecurity solutions company can increase their brand awareness and what brand awareness actually means in today's hyper-competitive marketplace. Then we'll turn our attention to how an advanced telecommunications and technology provider company can get more data center sales. Next, we'll look at how IaaS, infrastructure as a service, lead generation best practices works. After that, we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll look at how to find data center tenants. Then we'll go into how to connect with entities that need financing to purchase data centers. We know data centers take a lot of capital. So for sure, there's a big ecosystem in and around financial services with digital infrastructure and data centers. And as we head down the home stretch this week, we'll look at how a fiber optics network testing, monitoring, and analytics company generates leads and more productive meetings. So first question up for this week is, how can a cybersecurity solutions company increase its brand awareness? I think the most important place to start is that your brand and how you plan your brand positioning is so different today than it was as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. Today, your brand is anything and everything that your ideal prospects and ideal clients say about your company when you're not in the room. And given that we're now living in a world where you really don't get to be in the room for much of the buyer's journey, much of the sales cycle anymore, it's incumbent that we have a very different way of going to market and a very different brand strategy today than we would have as recently as 10 years ago. What does all this mean? Well, let's talk about some stats. Today, 83% of a typical buyer's journey, researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing, is now over before prospects want to talk with someone from your sales team. 83%, meaning that people are so into self-guided research now, asking questions of their peers on social media, watching podcasts and webinars and live streams, reading blogs, attending conferences, looking at review websites. There's so much that people are doing before they're finally ready to talk with someone from your sales team that you hardly have any surface area anymore relative to what it used to be. Because as recently as 10 years ago, that number from Gartner, 83% of the journey being over before vendor contact, that number hovered around 50%. More specifically, 56% was the number that CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, originally uncovered in the mid 2010s when they did this research with Serious Decisions and Salesforce. So it used to be that your sales team spent about half of the sales cycle, half of the buyer's journey with prospects. Now people don't want to talk with salespeople anymore very much. They become much more sales allergic. So with that in mind, when it comes to brand awareness for cybersecurity solutions, we have to operate realistically in the world that we actually live in, not the world that we'd like to live in. We're not going to go back to the future with the flux capacitor and the DeLorean to a time of 10 years ago. We actually have to operate in today's marketplace and be planning for what's going to happen in the near future as well. So in today's marketplace, it's incredibly important that your sales team, your business development, sales development reps, your account executives, anyone that's involved with working with clients and potential clients for your cybersecurity solutions, they can't show up as a sales professional anymore. Because if they do, they're going to be persona non grata for 83% of that process. So we need a way for your sales team to now show up as consultants, as teachers, as subject matter experts, as trusted advisors. And the most seasoned people on your team in that role, that have the most experience in and around the intersection of cybersecurity and the data center industry, they're more than likely thought leaders. So we need to think about what we're going to do to reposition your customer-facing team to show up in a way that's actually welcomed by your most important buyer personas. So this is a massive repositioning need, but it's incredibly important if you want to stay relevant to the way that people now research and make their purchase decisions. In a typical buyer's journey, most analysts have found about 28 touch points happen between complete stranger and purchase decision. The problem is, by default, most companies in and around the data center industry invest very aggressively in field marketing and events. They spend a huge percentage of their overall sales marketing go-to-market budget on a couple of big events a year, maybe a handful or two of big events. The problem with that approach is no matter how epic your booth is on the trade show floor, no matter how amazing the golf tournament is, no matter how incredible the cabana party is poolside or beachside, each of those only counts for one touch point. So unless you have the ability to execute at scale 25 to 30 of those a year, exactly with precision, laser guided precision directly to your most important buyer personas, we need a way to have a balanced approach so we can stay with these folks throughout their full buyer's journey, so we can help them frame the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the other cybersecurity solutions that are in front of them, throughout awareness when they know they have a goal they're trying to figure out, or a big nagging challenge or something that's stressing them out that they need to figure out, as they progress into consideration, where they start to evaluate all of the different solutions categories that are in front of them, and as they transform into the decision stage of the journey, where they're usually finally ready to talk with someone from your sales team. So we need a way to stay with them, so we ensure that our company remains on the short list. And if we stack the decks in our favor exceptionally well, we may find that we do such a good job that we dominate the short list to the point that we've used this education, we've used these events, we've used this subject matter expertise and these amazing resources to really help neutralize a lot of the competitive forces that are out there. So when it comes to a cybersecurity solutions company increasing brand awareness, we need to meet our prospects where they are, not where we'd like them to be, but where they actually are today. So we need to be exceptionally self-aware of where we win consistently. So case studies on your website will probably allow you to back into having an ideal client profile, an ICP. From that ideal client profile, you'll build out a target account list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred, a couple thousand companies that look like they're a great fit for your cybersecurity solutions in and around the data center industry. And then once you have a defined list of companies that you want to attract and build brand awareness with. We need to understand who are the people within those accounts that we need to build relationships with, the primary buyer persona, the secondary buyer persona, and what do we do to be the most amazing experts, resources on the planet when it comes to the intersection of cybersecurity and the data center industry. That's how a cybersecurity solutions company can increase its brand awareness in today's marketplace. Next question up is, how can an advanced telecommunications and technology provider get more data center sales? So, how does a company that provides advanced telecommunications and technology solutions get more data center sales? The first thing we need to look at is, are you selling advanced telecommunications and technology to the exact same clients? If so, we're building a single go-to-market playbook. If there are two different kinds of clients, then we potentially need two different go-to-market playbooks, potentially two different marketing plans and content plans and events strategies and sales teams even. So it's incredibly easier to figure out your product roadmap in such a way that you're marketing to just one defined kind of company, one ideal client profile, one set of buyer personas, as opposed to having to do this twice, having to do this well twice. So the first thing is, are we able to sell telecommunications and technology to the exact same clients? If we are, then we need to understand who these companies are that we've done best with. Where do we have the best reviews, testimonials, case studies? Where do our customer success, our account managers knock it out of the park to get our clients exceptionally quickly with exceptional efficiency from initial value, intended value, extended value, so it becomes relatively effortless, or at least consistent and predictable, to be able to engage in an account expansion, cross-sells, upsells, strong positive digital word of mouth, marketing collaborations, all the great things that allows you to continue to accelerate your growth flywheel. So once we know where we're doing best, then we go about defining our ideal client profiles. So we know geographically where these companies are located. Are we able to just work in a region? Do we work nationally? Do we work internationally, globally? Where are we able to best market, sell, and service these clients? Second, what company sizes are a good fit for our advanced telecommunications and technology solutions? Think Goldilocks. What's not too small, what's not too big, but just right? Because when it comes to most companies selling something technology or telecommunications related in and around the data center space, there is almost certainly a category of companies that are too small to afford what you have to offer. And there may be companies that are too large, where they want something that's significantly more complicated than what you can provide, or perhaps are doing this in-house or have wildly different needs than you can actually deliver on. So the self-awareness about the geographic component, the self-awareness about the company size, and then when it comes to advanced telecommunications and technology, especially when you start thinking about the geographic region, there's almost always an industry or business model type of component that comes into play with how you define your ideal client profile, because in certain geographic regions and certain industries, you have to contend with regulation, especially in the EU, the European Union, but there's many other regions around the world where choosing to do business in a certain vertical in a certain industry, and it's at the intersection of a certain geographic region, for sure necessitates having certain kinds of expertise to navigate these regulatory issues at the with telecommunications and technology. So we know where the ideal clients are located. We know roughly what company size they should be. We know what kinds of businesses. Once we have that, we can go about building out a target account list. This is anywhere from a couple dozen to a few hundred, maybe a few thousand. You may have heard this referred to as ABM, or account-based marketing. This is what defines the companies that we would love to be doing business with, but many of them, most of them, probably don't know that we exist today. Once we know that, we need to figure out who are the people within these companies that need to know that we exist. And you'll usually prioritize based on the relationships that monetize the best, that have the most influence, that have the most, I've often heard the word conviction used, that are the best internal champions. And make no mistake, there's no such thing as a decision maker anymore. It's almost certainly going to be decision by committee. So we need to know the cluster, the group of people that we need to be building these relationships with. And do they all tend to be similar to each other in the goals and the goals they're trying to achieve and the challenges that they're trying to overcome? Or are they different? If they're quite different, if they have completely different goals, completely different challenges, then we may need to segment into one or more buyer personas, where your most important group of stakeholders that you want to build these relationships with would be your primary buyer personas. The second most important group would be the secondary buyer personas. And if there's a third group that's involved in the decision committee, but isn't quite as influential as first place or second place, they would be a tertiary buyer persona. You may over time as well end up defining a negative buyer persona. That's where you have a specialized segmentation strategy that you would apply potentially in paid ads like paid search ads or paid social ads, and certainly have different pages on your website, have different drop-down lists on your lead generation forms to be able to tell, is somebody a primary, a secondary, a tertiary buyer persona, or a negative buyer persona. Obviously, if they're a negative buyer persona, we want to filter them out relatively quickly so we don't invest a lot of sales resources in companies that we've determined that we really can't help. So in terms of how to get more data center sales, now that we've defined at the company level who we want and at the individual level who we want, we need to give people a reason to want to spend time with us. They need to see us as not just an advanced telecommunications and technology vendor. They need to see us as the definitive go-to experts on anything and everything having to do with advanced telecommunications and technology at the intersection of their data center related needs. So we use our buyer persona research to figure out what's top of mind for each of these groups. What do they need to figure out to get a big promotion, to hit their goals, to hit their objectives and key results, their key performance indicators, all of that good stuff. Once we know the consensus on that for each of our most important buyer personas, and the flip side of that, we know what's stressing them out to no end, their biggest struggles, their biggest challenges, that if they screw up, could cause a lot of derailment in their career, to say the least. Once we know the consensus on that, then we can go about building a content and an event strategy so that we can consistently show up as educators, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, consultants, and maybe even elevated to the level of thought leaders. Because the more time that we're able to spend with these data center related prospects and clients that would be a good fit for advanced telecommunications and technology, the more surface area that we're able to control throughout the full buyer's journey, owning as many of the 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision as possible, the more likely it is that we control the criteria that they use to judge everything else that's in the marketplace. We're for sure going to be on the short list. And if we do this exceptionally well, this education, these resources, these events can sometimes completely neutralize the competitive options that are out there. But at the absolute minimum, we earn our way onto the short list with not just the primary buyer persona, but the secondary buyer persona. And when this is done well, when this is executed well, all or most of the decision committee. So when it comes to an advanced telecommunications and technology provider that wants to get more data center related sales, we need to understand the companies, we need to understand the individuals, we need to show up where they are, and we need to provide an exceptional value so that they see us as the go-to experts, so they want to spend time with your client-facing team members, spend as much time as possible where you can not only address the biggest questions and goals and challenges they have, but help them navigate what comes next. Because based on the pattern recognition for this kind of buyer persona and this kind of company, this is what they're going to care about first, second, third, fourth, all the way to step number 28. And you have breadcrumb trails, popcorn trails to be able to help them get from one step to the next as easy as possible, because you've seen what works exactly well for buyer personas, for individuals, and for teams and for companies just like this. So next question up is IaaS lead generation best practices, infrastructure as a service lead generation best practices. So what's interesting is there's a lot of overlap and synonyms in and around the data center industry. Some companies consider themselves digital infrastructure, ones that are used to selling infrastructure, kind of similar to how software as a service might be sold, some kind of recurring managed services, something along those lines, may categorize their business model as infrastructure as a service. This is a technology focused company that's providing outsourced digital infrastructure to their clients, solving a variety of problems around storage, process, computes, security, a whole host of related issues regarding infrastructure and managed services. But at any rate, it's up to you to define your business model. Presumably, if you're not a startup, you've figured out what your company is really good at. You've figured out where you've been most successful, and you don't need me really to help you define what IaaS, what infrastructure as a service actually means to your business. So you've figured out that business model part. You have a chief product officer or a co-founder or a product management team that helps to figure out exactly what your clients need from your company to help them improve what they're doing, reach their goals, overcome their challenges, everything that makes you have a unique selling proposition, value proposition in the marketplace. But what you have asked me for help with today is best practices around lead generation. How can you improve what you're doing with lead generation? And the first place I would tell you to start is so many companies that approach us here at DCSMI aren't especially clear on what a lead is. And if you're going to focus on improving your lead generation, it's incredibly important that you get all of your internal and perhaps some external stakeholders together that work with your team on lead generation and get crystal clear about what a lead actually is. Because marketing professionals typically define a lead as a known contact that's gone from anonymous to known contact that looks like they could be at some point interested in what you have to offer, but haven't really shown a ton of interest quite yet. So if we think about a typical buyer's journey that someone goes through, there's the awareness stage, consideration, and decision. During the awareness stage, your IaaS prospect knows that they have a big goal that they're trying to figure out, a big goal that they're trying to achieve, a big problem or a big challenge that they're trying to figure out. But they haven't really given it a well-defined name yet. They just know the ache and the pain. They just know the symptom. They kind of sort of know what it might look like, but there's definitely no defined solutions name. There's no company yet in mind. They're just out looking for information on social media. They're out looking for information on search. Maybe they're watching webinars, watching podcasts, reading ebooks, reading blog posts, asking questions on some communities and groups and stuff like that. And we want to figure out a way to intercept these potential clients as early as possible. In the consideration stage, they've gotten a little further along. They've given what they're trying to achieve some kind of name. And now they're comparing the different approaches to achieving that goal, or the different approaches that are available to solve that particular problem or challenge. Once they figure that out, then and only then are they typically ready to look at specific companies in the decision stage. Now, most analysts that look at the digital infrastructure, that look at the IaaS marketplace, have concluded that there's a few dozen different touch points that happen in between a complete stranger and a purchase decision. One of them that's often thrown around is 28 touch points in between complete stranger and purchase. So the goal for your lead generation efforts is not just to generate a lead. We need to generate a lead, and we need to stay with our ideal prospects throughout most or ideally all of that buyer's journey, through as many of those 28 touch points as possible. And that becomes a big challenge in the space because by default, so many IaaS companies are programmed to think that field marketing and event marketing is their nirvana. And for some reason, it's superior over all other forms of lead generation and lead nurturing. And if you do that correctly and you get access to the right buyer personas in the right places, in the right context, for sure, that interaction, that touch point can significantly influence the buyer's journey. But it's not like it gets 10 times credit or 20 times credit and neutralizes all of the other typical behaviors that your ideal prospects and clients go through. It just counts as one. They're still going to leave the conference. They're still going to leave the golf tournament. They're still going to leave the trade show. And when they're back at work the next day, they're going to go on with their routine. And a couple days later, a couple weeks later, when this itch comes up again, They're going to Google, and they're going to LinkedIn, and they're going to YouTube, and they're going to Copilot, and they're going to ChatGPT, and they're asking questions on a Slack channel, and they're participating in a Discord or a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group, or they're texting their coworkers, or they're reading reviews. It's not like they had such a phenomenal experience with you at the conference that they're going to suspend everything that they know about how modern buyers research and make their purchase decisions. They still have this, the thing they look at first thing in the morning when they get up, last thing in the evening before they go to bed, and dozens to hundreds of times throughout the day. So how do we get more time here? How do we get more time between here and what they're thinking about that's going to drive what they do for their infrastructure as a service, IaaS, digital infrastructure related decisions? Is we need to figure out who they are and what they care about. And we need to show up in that context as early as possible and as often as possible. So we're not just seen as an IaaS vendor, we're seen as the go-to experts on infrastructure as a service. We're seen as the teachers, the trusted advisors, the subject matter experts, the consultants, the thought leaders. So it's kind of like you need to give your sales team, your whole client-facing team, a makeover, a repositioning, a rebrand, so that they no longer show up as a vendor, so that they show up as this elite Big Four like consulting entity. The Big Four, what do I mean by that? Like PwC, EY, Deloitte, KPMG, the best of the best when it comes to technology related consulting, so that they have this, your prospects and your clients have this world-class experience that addresses their biggest goals, that helps them navigate their biggest challenges, that makes them want to spend time with your team. So nobody has to beg for attention. Nobody has to badger them repeatedly with cold email messages or cold LinkedIn messages, or heaven forbid, cold call. They don't have to nag and badger. Your prospects and your clients actually want to spend time with your team members because they're getting so much value from them. So when it comes to those lead generation best practices, we need to figure out a way at the intersection of where each buyer is in their journey and who they are to consistently be generating leads, to converting in the anonymous stranger to a known lead, to reconverting them as they move further and further along in the buyer's journey, because you've seen the pattern recognition, you know what comes second and third and fourth all the way to step 28. From a CRM standpoint, from a marketing and sales technology standpoint, as someone advances to the point that they're ready for sales contact, that they're showing some signs that there may be an opportunity to do business, typically that lead would progress first to marketing qualified, then sales qualified or sales accepted. But ultimately, where most of you likely want to be is to the point where that lead is progressed to a sales opportunity. That's where this person and potentially their colleagues, their team members on this account are showing some interest in doing business with your company, where a experienced member from your sales or business development team can attend a meeting and walks away from that meeting understanding a potentially a forecast close date and a forecasted deal size, and obviously recognize that these are depending on the nature of how long your sales cycle is and how big the ticket prices that you're selling. These could be anywhere from a very rough guess to a highly precise guess, but they're leaving that initial meeting with a strong sense that this could close at this potential date and it could close for this amount. And then they move from, they're staying in an opportunity, but then there's deal stages that they would progress through based on buyer-centric behaviors. That's the key thing with all of this, is we need to be a lot more buyer-centric and less seller-centric. There's really no room for selfish lead generation anymore in anything related to digital infrastructure or data centers or mission critical facilities. We need to show up where they are, not where we want them to be, but where they are right now. And we need to ooze and we need to exude enormous amounts of value that makes us have that like metaphorical doctor-patient relationship, heavily consultative, so that they really are getting exceptional value from the time that they're spending with members of your team on a one-on-one basis, when they consume your on-demand resources, when they attend your events, when they attend your, at the risk of getting really meta here, your webinars and your live streams. So they're just getting a ton of value that helps them understand all the different ways that they should be thinking about choosing the best infrastructure for their particular company. So those are some of the most important considerations to think about when it comes to IaaS, infrastructure as a service, lead generation best practices.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg back here from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you are watching our weekly live stream, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. So next question that I'm going to address today is how do I find data center tenants? How to find data center tenants? That's a really interesting question because the tenants implies that you're focusing on running a sales process that is very heavily real estate focused. And we know that so much of the co-location, so much of the operator business model focuses very, very heavily on the intersection of technology, facilities, and real estate. We know there's a whole separate ecosystem in and around data centers and digital infrastructure that is just real estate and real estate investment trusts and all of the capital, the millions, the hundreds of millions, potentially the billions that are needed to grow this industry at the pace to keep up with demand and keep moving forward. But when it comes to finding data center tenants, what that usually tells me is the approach is focusing very heavily on real estate and not so much on technology and not so much on facilities. If you're okay with that, that's fine. But if you intended to focus a little bit more on what your company can do to differentiate itself with its approach to information technology and facilities, you may want to think about whether tenant is really the right word that you refer to in public-facing materials and events and messaging having to do with your future potential tenants versus clients versus partners versus however you want to address this. But years ago, what I would typically hear from DCRE, from data center real estate folks, is they were looking for the magical database that told them when certain agreements like co-location agreements were coming up for renewal, when they were expiring, because they'd want to swoop in there with just the right timing. You know, it's super interesting that we're in this place now where both within the data center industry and the much broader information technology industry, we're in a place where people have firmly recognized that like 90 to 95% of potential clients are not in market right now. What does that mean? They could be from the perfect company. They could be the perfect buyer persona or the second most important buyer persona, and they'll be fantastically interested in exploring the kinds of information and resources and space and data center related locations that you have, but it may be anywhere from a couple of weeks to maybe even several months or more down the road. So it's incredibly important if we want to be relevant to the way that people now research and make their purchase decisions, that we're willing to play the long game. What that means is we need to be very focused at the company level on who the individuals work for. We've defined our ideal client profile or ideal tenant profile in this particular case. So we know both where these properties are located, where these locations are, sites are, but we also know where the tenants would be, where the clients are located in terms of geographic region. And in some cases, you're selling real estate locally to people that are local. In some cases, you're selling nationally and globally. But we need to be crystal clear on the ideal client profile, the ideal tenant profile of their location, their company size. Do you do better with tenants from huge companies, or do you do better with tenants from mid-sized companies, or really small startup-y kind of companies. So we need to define that. And then we need to figure out if there's a business model or industry component that's especially well suited for the kind of properties that you're representing and looking for tenants for. Are there certain things that are especially conducive to certain industries or business models, especially depending on regulatory environments in certain geographic areas and certain attributes of the facility that you're looking to fill? So all of this comes into play in defining at a company level who we're looking for. And then we need to know at an individual level who are the stakeholders that are most likely going to be navigating this kind of real estate offering that you're presenting in front of them. And again, a lot of it's the job titles and functions will very heavily depend on the company size you're going after, how specialized versus more generalized particular roles and functions, and who's on a typical decision committee. But we need clarity at a company level who we're looking for. From there, we should be able to back into a target list of people that we need to get in front of. And then we need to understand, depending on the property that you're representing, depending on what's unique about it, how big it is, how small it is, the kinds of ideal tenants that you're looking for. We need to understand what makes the individual, who the individuals would be that we need to build relationships with, and what their priorities are, what their biggest goals are, what they're struggling with, what they're frustrated the most with. And then we need to figure out a way to show up as early as possible so that we're with them throughout this full journey. It's a misnomer, a huge mistake to think that you only want to talk with people that are in market, that are ready for sales contact. Because if you wait until they're at the 95% or point or 90% point or even 83% point, if you look at the data center industry on a much more macro level of like how Gartner's defined how B2B kind of purchase decisions are made. If you wait till your prospects, if you wait till your potential tenants are that far along, someone else or some other companies have been spending a lot of time with those potential tenants, educating and building trust with them, helping them figure out what to look for, what the criteria is that they're going to use to judge what facilities they're ultimately going to put on their short list. So in other words, if you don't get in there early, if you don't get in there often, you will more than likely have to settle for that tenant, that prospective tenant's definition of what they're looking for based on likely a competitor or indirect competitor of yours being the one that stacked the decks in their particular favor. So if you want to be the one that's stacking the decks in your company's particular favor, you need to take the long game and get in there as early as possible, so you're seen as a lot more than just real estate. So you're seen as the go-to expert, subject matter expert, teachers, consultants, trusted advisors on anything and everything having to do with digital infrastructure in this particular market for this kind of company, for this kind of potential tenants. So that's really the key to all of this. For sure, if you're able to build up lists of people in competing properties in the local area and target them more specifically, more power to you. But on a much more macro level, a lot of it is defining geographically. Obviously, where your site is going to be, where the data center is located, whether you're looking to just target locally, whether you're looking to target nationally, whether you're looking to target globally, and then the size of tenant, the size of company that's a really good fit. Think Goldilocks, what's too big, what's too small, and then are there certain industries? Once you have those 3 or 4 parameters defined, you can go about building a list of potential tenants, and then you need to go about building awareness and educating and building trust with those tenants so they see you as the go-to advisor and not just focused on the real estate transaction. Because there are some people that can still win just based on the real estate transaction. And depending on your company size, if you have the brand of like JLL or CBRE behind you or something like that, you can play this a little differently than someone that has a much lesser known brand nationally and globally. But if you're somewhere in the middle, yeah, for sure, it behooves you for your real estate professionals, for your sales team to get very heavily involved in building their personal brands, building their team's brand, building their company's brand up in the space so that they're seen as go-to experts. And that's how you will find tenants. That's how you will get tenants that will come to you, as opposed to you having to chase them because you've taken the time to play the long game. And you recognize that the way people research and make decisions around data center real estate is very, very different today than how it was as recently as 10 years ago. Next question is, how do we connect with entities that need financing to purchase data centers? Yeah, capital and debt. What makes the data center industry, digital infrastructure go around? So, how do you connect with entities that need financing to purchase data centers? So, we need to understand where your company has done best in the past. What kinds of investors, what kinds of data center owners have you done best with in the past? And maybe there's testimonials or reviews or case studies that you can go based on. But from there, once we understand what kinds of companies and individuals you've done best with, we can go about defining an ideal client profile. We can go about researching buyer personas, and we can understand exactly what kind of company this is, what their business model is. Are they private equity? Are they venture capital? Are they something pension fund? Is it something completely different from that? We can understand what size they're at. For sure, your company has likely noticed that there are certain size companies that may be too big. There may be certain size companies that are way too small, and you probably arrive at some kind of Goldilocks definition at some point of what's just right, what's not too big, what's not too small. And then there's more than likely a geographic component to this as well. Where are these investors? Where are these where are these companies that need financing located? Are they located in your own region? Are they located in your own country? Are they located all over the globe? We need to get clarity on geography. We need to get clarity on their company size. We need to get clarity on their particular business model or industry. Once we know the answers to those 3-4 different questions, from there, we'll have our ideal client profile. We can build a target account list. And then from there, we can understand who in each of these kinds of companies, who do we need to build relationships with, who's going to need financing at some particular point in time. And a lot of the roles, a lot of the buyer personas will depend on their company size, how many different hats an individual wears. Obviously, if you get the second or third best person in a 10-person company or 30 or 40 or 50-person company, it's way easier to navigate the decision committee than getting the wrong person in a company with thousands of employees. So that for sure comes into play. But is it like a CFO? Is it a chief investment officer? Is there a dedicated real estate person? Is there an acquisition person? Is a CEO, partner? All of these things with navigating org charts are going to come based on your experience with where you've done best. But with that in mind, you should be able to arrive at who your most important buyer persona is, who your second most important buyer persona is, and then how you're going to build your plan to educate and build trust with these kinds of stakeholders in these kinds of companies. So the best way to connect with them is in a way that positions you as a consultant, as a trusted advisor, as a subject matter expert, as potentially a thought leader on anything and everything that has to do with the intersection of finance for data centers. And it could be blogs, it could be podcasts, it could be videos, it could be events, it could be online events, virtual events like this, live streams and webinars and thinking like that. And of course, you can repurpose all of those in many different ways, shapes, or forms. Like if you're holding a 30-minute webinar on data, what's new in data center finance for particular industry for a particular year or whatever, from that 30-minute webinar, you probably had 3 or 4 main points on the outline that you're going to cover. So it's easy to split those up into 3 or 4 separate videos and 3 or 4 separate blog posts. And then from each of those assets, it's easy to chop those up into micro content, into shorts for YouTube and LinkedIn and other places, short videos, image-based content, text-based content. The goal is we need to be where our potential buyers are, the most important potential buyers are that are looking for financing for their data center related acquisition in the near future. But we need to also be prepared to play the long game. We need to be prepared to own as many of the 28 touch points as possible between complete stranger and purchase decision. But most of all, we need to flip the switch so that they don't see us as a vendor, that they don't see us on just focused on a transaction, that they see us as the go-to experts on the space, in the space on everything to do with data center related finance issues. So it's really, really important that we are able to arrive as early as possible in their research and decision-making process, and we stay with them throughout the entire buyer's journey, throughout the entire research and decision-making process. So the best way to connect with entities that need financing to purchase data centers is to reposition, give a radical makeover to members of your sales and business development team so that they now show up as consultants and trusted advisors and experts, and not someone that's just trying to pitch them on something and qualify them something and drag them through a very selfish sales process. We need to show up with where they are, not where we want them to be in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but where they actually are today. And in most cases, the widest part of the funnel is people that are just looking for information that could be a fantastic fit, but maybe anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months away from truly needing to explore what kind of financing that your company could provide to help them with their data center related purchase. One more question that we're going to cover today. How can a fiber optics network testing, monitoring, and analytics firm generate leads and meetings? So how does a fiber optics network testing, monitoring, and analytics firm generate more leads and meetings? That's a fantastic question. So fiber optics network testing, monitoring, and analytics. So your company is in the information technology part, the IT part of the data center industry, specifically in and around telecommunications and network infrastructure. How fiber optics comes into facilities. So you probably spend time talking about interconnects and cross connects and internet exchanges and peering and meet me rooms and all that good stuff. So your expertise is around the testing and monitoring and analytics. The way I would approach it is I would look at where your company has succeeded the best in the past. What kinds of data center related companies have been most successful with your testing, monitoring, and analytics services? When you're able to do that, you'll be able to back into, at a company level, what these firms have in common. Where are they located? How big or how small are they? And what kinds of industries, what kinds of business models do they tend to have in common? From there, you should be able to document your ideal client profile, your ICP, which would allow you to build out a target account list, a target company list of those firms that don't yet know that you exist, or maybe some of them know you exist, but are not currently doing business with your company, that you think would be a phenomenal fit for your fiber optics network testing, monitoring, and analytics services. So maybe it's a few dozen, maybe it's a few hundred, maybe it's a few thousand companies. And then within those individual companies, who are the kinds of individuals that we need to educate and build trust with? Are they CTOs of really small companies? Are they IT managers? Are they infrastructure, VPs of infrastructure? Are they telecommunications executives? Only you can answer that. And that will largely depend on the size of the data center entities that you're selling to. The smaller entities, you'll be reaching out to and looking to build relationships with people that wear a lot of different hats. And if you're selling to huge companies, let's say you're selling to Aquinix or Digital Realty or NTT or Switch or something like that, then yeah, the roles will be a lot more specialized. So this is where defining where you've been most successful, your case studies, testimonials, reviews, defining your ideal client profile, where that comes into play in defining how granular you approach your segmentation and your buyer personas. So if you're looking to generate more leads and more productive meetings, it really comes down to getting very specific about the companies that we want to be selling to and the individuals within those companies that need to know that we exist, and where we can educate and build trust with those kind of individuals. And we'll bucket them together, we'll group them together, we'll define our segmentation strategy based on what those individuals have in common, not necessarily by their job title, but what common goals that they have that they're working on, that if they get right, could get them a big promotion. If they screw up, could get them an opposite promotion, what their biggest challenges and struggles are. That's what allows us to define the buyer personas. And the people that are on a decision committee will typically, some of them will be a primary buyer persona, some of them could be a secondary buyer persona, but they all in some way, shape, or form interact with each other, and they all have some kind of influence on what kind of company gets chosen for fiber optics network testing and monitoring and analytics. So the goal is to lean into the idea that your buyers no longer want to spend a lot of time with your sales team until they're at the absolute end of their research and decision-making process. Gartner, for example, found that 83% of a typical purchase decision is now over before vendor contact or sales contact. The way we get around that is we can't show up as sales professionals or marketing professionals anymore. We need to show up as consultants, as teachers, as subject matter experts, as trusted advisors. And the way that we're able to do that is we need to intensely focus on what's in it for them. We need to look at whatever you're currently doing that comes across as selfish, and we need to get rid of that. And we need to have extreme empathy for what the most important stakeholders at these companies care about when it comes to fiber optic network testing and monitoring and analytics. And we need to provide amazingly helpful educational resources and experiences that feel a lot more like they're interacting with someone from a big four consulting firm and a lot less than just a vendor who's trying to close them on a transaction. Like Big Four might be like PwC, EY, KPMG, kind of Deloitte. It should feel that good, that elite. The most seasoned, the most experienced people on your team can be positioned as thought leaders. The more junior people on your teams should be the amazing tour guides and concierges of all of your great educational resources that you have available to help people learn all about fiber optic network testing and monitoring and analytics. And early on, your buyer personas, they have goals they're trying to figure out. They have questions that they're trying to answer. They have stressors or challenges or struggles that they need to figure out how they're going to address. In the middle of their journey, they get a little more specific on the solutions category, and they start comparing the different options that are available in front of them. And at the decision stage, when they get to like that 83% point, then and only then are they ready to look at product related information. Then and only then are they typically ready to talk with someone from your sales team. So we need to figure out a way to get in early and get in often so we own as much of that surface area and awareness and consideration as possible, and not just in the decision stage. 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. We need to figure out a way to crush it, to dominate it, to own as many of those 28 touch points as possible so that these buyers want to spend time with members of your team, as opposed to you having to chase those prospects and beg them to spend time from your team. And it really comes down to transforming yourself so that you're able to be seen as the go-to experts in the marketplace at the intersection of fiber optic network testing, monitoring, and analytics for anything and everything to do with data center related facilities. So in most cases, these are cultural decisions that need to start from the top down, depending on your company's size. If your company's below a few hundred employees, almost certainly like a CEO or chief commercial officer or chief revenue officer or someone like that leads the charge and be the internal champion on this. If you're a huge company, then yeah, it's like a VP or division managing director or partner or something like that. But these are top-down kind of initiatives. For most companies, they're big culture changes of being able to say that nobody needs us to read the website to them anymore. Nobody needs us to give them the exact same sound bites that they can get from navigating all these self-propelled, self-driven buyer's journey type of things. And we know that these preferences are a big deal because McKinsey found 70 to 80% of decision makers now prefer this virtual journey, and that continues to accelerated a ton during the first few years of the 2020s when everyone was spending a ton of time at home. But it continues to accelerate as people want to be more in the driver's seat when it comes to how they research and make their purchase decisions. So for your company to be successful in generating productive, qualified leads and meetings where you've already educated and built trust, and they're coming to the meetings having already absorbed your methodology and are already indoctrinated and bought into your way of thinking. And in most cases, your resources have been so exceptionally good that they've already been passed around to other members of the committee. So by the time you show up to the meeting, they already know, like, and trust you. They already know, like, and trust your company. And they're literally quoting something that they learned from your downloadable ebook or planning guide or your webinar series, because you've become the gold standard of how they judge all the other available options in this space when it comes to other companies that are involved with fiber network testing, monitoring, and analytics. When you're able to achieve that, you will be providing the kind of experience, the kind of customer experience, the kind of prospect experience that your data center related buyers are looking for. You'll for sure make sure that you're on the short list. In some cases, the experience may be so exceptionally valuable that you may have neutralized all of the available competitive options that are in front of those particular buyers. But if you're serious about growing your business with fiber optics network testing, monitoring, and analytics in today's marketplace, and you want to be able to generate great leads and great productive meetings for your sales team that get you teed up for the best possible closing experience, where they sail through your customer success, your account management process, super smooth onboarding. They get initial, intended value, extended value, phenomenal digital word of mouth from that relationship, great account expansion capabilities, great upsell, cross-sell, all that stuff. It really starts with, at the beginning, understanding who they are, what they care about, how we can provide a ton of value long before they even know that our company exists, so that we own mindset in a way that truly makes your competition envious, scratching their head and wondering, like, how are they doing this? How are they growing so quickly? And you'll know your secret sauce is that you figured out a way for your sales and marketing, your whole go-to-market team, your product channel partnerships, everyone that's involved in client facing, to no longer just be focused on closing a transaction, but instead be focused on building your brand exceptionally well, as educating and building trust with the most important people that are involved with anything and everything having to do with fiber optics in and around a particular data center. So that's the final question that I'm going to have time to address in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To make sure that you stay in the loop on new events and webinars and other resources similar to this, make sure that you're subscribed to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that gets delivered to your email inbox every Sunday. You can subscribe on our website directly at www.dcsmi.com. I wish you great success in growing your data center related business. Have a great week. Stay safe, and we'll see you back next time.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.